So I'm back here at the Wargaming table, um, working on Troops in Contact, a set of rules that um, I've been developing for small unit combat actions in a contemporary setting. Um, I'm not sure that I am entirely happy with the progress, but I am happy to try and make progress. Um, so I guess this is another design and experimentation session, and also somewhat of an update. Um, I guess I'll first talk about Close Combat Marine, and then uh, take a look at the rules as they are. um, okay, so Close Combat was a computer war game that was very successful, I think. Um, it was a bit of a landmark design in its detail and in its deep down, up close, small unit combat action scale and scope. Okay, so that was that, and then I guess Close Combat Marines was a version of Close Combat developed for the United States Marine Corps and the training of Marines. So Close Combat Marines was a specially developed version of Close Combat for the U.S. Marine Corps. Okay, so I'm going to relate, well, basically some things that have, or how things have developed in my design effort here over the last several days. I'm going to relate events as more or less exactly as they happened, because I could not have planned this better. So in my research of the latest combat combat studies, I guess, of Operation Enduring Freedom and Operation Iraqi Freedom. In that search for source material, I came across this Close Combat Marine Workbook. I came across this. What I did is I quickly thumbed through it. And I thought, hey, this kind of looks like this could provide some source material. And so I set it aside and continued on with my research. And then just the other day, I picked it up again and took a closer look at it. And what I found is what looks a lot like war game scenarios or situations. So I'm looking here as a fight 4.1, a name, the Wadi. It has a task organization at the squad level, squad and team level. And then it has a situation and a mission and execution and tasks. It has a sketch. And then on top of that, it has issues for discussion and tactical themes. And so I thought, wow, this is like ready-made source material for developing situations for designing and playtesting Troops in Contact. So then I'm like, wow, where did this come from? So I'm looking at it. Marine Corps Institute. That's good. That's a valid and commendable source, right? Recent. Okay, May 2002. That's good. And then I'm start from the beginning, and there's a foreword. Close combat and learning infantry tactics. As a matter of fact, this is exactly, I'm going to start off exactly as I'm going. So now I'm trying to figure out who's behind this and what can I, how am I to evaluate this source material, basically. So this is what I'm reading. Close combat, which I was already familiar with. I was not a big player of close combat. I did try it. I certainly enjoyed it. Yeah, but I just wasn't an avid player. Actually, I wasn't that interested in that scale and scope back then. But anyways, I was already familiar with close combat. So close combat is a computer combat simulation published by Atomic Games. The focus of the simulation is on infantry combat at the small unit level. That sounds good. Of course, I already knew that, but that's good. Okay, so this has something to do with a small unit combat topic, right? The series currently consists of 5 versions, so on and so forth. Then it goes on. So this forward, okay, I am an infantry major with 14 years commissioned service, 7 years with 5th Marines, 3 years in schools, and 3 years as an infantry training officer with the Marine Corps Warfighting Lab. I've deployed overseas with 2nd Battalion, 5th Marines 4 times. I have commanded 2 infantry platoons and 1 rifle company. I have served as a battalion operations officer and regimental operations officer. I'm a student of tactics. I have taught NCOs and officers infantry tactics. I have participated and led tactical decision training. So right there, I instantly know where to place this person. I was infantry for 13 years. Okay, I'm not reading anymore. I was infantry for 13 years. I served with the 101st Airborne Division in Kosovo, trained at Joint Readiness Training Center as an enlisted infantryman, commissioned through Officer Candidate School, branched infantry, served as a platoon leader twice, served as, so like this guy, he commanded 2 infantry platoons. I commanded a Bradley infantry platoon and a support platoon with 1st Infantry Division with service with combat service in Iraq. I was a rifle company commander in 10th Mountain Division, an HHC company commander in 10th Mountain Division served with combat service in Afghanistan. So right away, I know where to place this guy, and I know that, well, I know where all this stuff is kind of coming from now, and I like what I'm reading, right? So then I go on, none of these activities or learning experience can match the effective and focused tactical learning that I've experienced through repetitive fighting of the small unit scenarios in close combat, and goes on and on. So basically he's going on, talking about lessons learned, and he's saying basically the training value of gaming, basically. The training value of simulation gaming. So already I'm like, wow, this is like perfect, right? And then, so I know, again, I know that the material here is coming from coming from a perspective that aligns with an effort to develop a small unit combat action simulation game. So I go on, turn the page, I finish the forward, and then at the very bottom, this is signed Brendan B. McBreen, Major USMC. And this could not be more interesting for me. The light bulb goes off immediately, and this is, for me, like the closing of a big circle. Lieutenant Colonel McBreen, I served under Lieutenant Colonel McBreen in 2010 at United States Joint Forces Command, before Lieutenant Colonel McBreen retired from the USMC. And I will say that Lieutenant Colonel McBreen was probably the smartest, most intelligent, most intellectually impressive superior officers I ever served with. Very impressive person, very impressive officer. Yeah, so it was just incredible to realize that I know exactly who's behind this, and or at least who, the name behind this, and I was, needless to say, instantly, okay, this is going to be important, and so I have decided that this is a perfect another piece of source material to help in the design and development of this rule set, because the kind of the design philosophy behind the simulation game is essentially the same approach and perspective that McBreen used when developing all of this for the training of Marines. So that's what happened very recently, and so let me give you an example of how I will be proceeding to use this. So we go right to Module 1, Control of Fires, right? Module 1, Control of Fires. Small unit leaders, squad, section, and team leaders are responsible for directing the fires of their units. Fires need to be coordinated in order to be effective. Okay, right now, this is perfect because this simulation game, Troops in Contact, is an infantry game. Okay, there are vehicles, but this is an infantry game. This is a simulation game about planning fires, controlling fires, and well, I guess I'll go in order: planning fires, executing fires, and controlling fires. And then, of course, maneuver that goes along with that. That's what this simulation game is about. This is small unit combat action, up front. The personal, the first 25 meters, or is it the last 25 meters? Whatever. Okay, so concentrate your fire. Without direction, Marines tend to fire at random targets. All of this, of course, is true for soldiers too. So I guess I'll say soldier Marines, because again, I've decided that Troops in Contact is going to be based on U.S. Army and United States Marine Corps units in combat, with equal emphasis given to the various opposing forces. So the opposing, I don't know a better way to put it than it's a design principle, and it's a design goal to make the opposing forces as legitimate as friendly forces. So that's a responsibility on my part. I will try to achieve that, but the simulation game is basically U.S. Army, U.S. Marine Corps in action. Okay. This leads to ineffective and dispersed fires. Unit leaders need to concentrate overwhelming fires at a single target, point fire. When that target is destroyed, all fires can be shifted to the next target. Sequentially destroying multiple targets with mass fires is far more effective than distributing ineffective fires across the battlefield. Now, I'm going over this because I asked you, does the small unit combat action game that you're familiar with do that well? Does it do that well? Does it teach that lesson well? Area fire is sometimes needed, particularly when suppressing suspected enemy positions. Assigning specific targets to specific weapons is sometimes necessary. Always realize, however, that dispersal of fires weakens your effort. And so now we have the diagrams, dispersed fires or ineffective fires. Without control by the unit leader, each man selects and fires a target to his front. That's what you have here. Does the war game that you have in mind emphasize this and kind of reward this? Or does the game emphasize and reward this? The enemy's flanking move can only be stopped by a leader who controls the fires of his unit and concentrates on the greatest threat. Right? So fires are concentrated here to address the flanking enemy. And again, is this emphasized in the small unit combat action game in your mind? That's in your mind. All right, control techniques. Fire commands, base weapon, base unit. On my tracer, when I was a fire team leader, that was one of my favorite commands on my tracer. On my tracer as a fire team leader, I fire at the point, the priority of fire, the priority target, and the team follows on. Okay. And then we have an example, control of fires example, with commentary, which is just great. Okay, and then we come to the first kind of exercise, the first exercise, what's called Fight 1-1 Urban Contact. And you have a little, task organization. You have UR, first platoon. You have one squad and one machine gun team. Company commander's orders, so your situation, enemy patrols, mostly squad size, have become increasingly bolder as we have withdrawn south. I think we can expect tentative contact here in the village this morning. I'll reference the sketch here now. So enemy, friendly forces, withdrawing here to the south. Okay, so again, enemy patrols, mostly squad size, have become increasingly bolder as we have withdrawn south. I think we can expect tentative contact here in the village this morning. Battalion withdraws south and repositions in order to turn over this sector to Allied forces. Mission, Alpha Company, so this is 1st and 3rd platoons of Alpha Company. So Alpha Company guards the battalion rear in order to prevent enemy interference with our withdrawal. Execution, 1 platoon is detached to battalion. 1 platoon guards the town, while 1 platoon moves south to establish next rearguard position. Fire support, no CAS, no close air support, no artillery, no mortars. So tasks, 1st platoon, main effort, guard the company rear in order to prevent enemy interference with our withdrawal. 2nd platoon detach, 3rd platoon move south and establish next rearguard position in order to permit 1st platoon to withdraw. Mortars, priority of fires to 3rd platoon. And then that is kind of that's the setting for what one can easily imagine to be a first training situation or a good play test, a good early, very early play test situation, and then to show how these chapters progress. You have issues for discussion. How did you control fires? Did you concentrate or distribute your fires? How did you plan to withdraw? In what order did units withdraw? What triggered withdrawal? Did this trigger give you enough time? What caused most of your casualties? How could these casualties have been reduced? Tactical themes, defensive, control of fires in built-up areas, and withdrawal plans for small units. So that is what I wanted to show about this and its part in what I'm doing here. Now, so using this as a situation for playing here. This is what I did. So this is your squad made up of 2 fire teams equipped or as a assault plus weapon type. So these are 4-man fire teams, each with a squad automatic weapon and a grenadier. This is a medium machine gun, 2-person crew. I set up blue 4 in these buildings of the village here, like that. So in this situation, the water isn't here. The battalion is withdrawing here, over here, and Blue 4 squad is in the village, again, tasked to guard, prevent enemy interference. So, so then I had an opposing forces squad made up of 3 teams, 2 rifle teams and 1 team with 1 squad automatic weapon. And what I did is I had them start off map up here, start off map up here, right there. Had them move through the rough terrain, enter the village, and then get up here to the edge of the buildings. So I'm kind of picking up here where this would be right before probably first contact. First of all, what's very interesting is that it took 5 action cycles for Red 4 to get here. That is 5 minutes of simulated time, which, if you consider about 200, they covered 200 meters through most of it, 3/4 of it through rough terrain, entered buildings, and moved to the south edge of the buildings. All in 5 minutes of simulated time. And when I did the calculations the other day, yesterday, I'm very comfortable with that scale. Very comfortable with that scale. Worked out, quite well. Okay, so now we are right before what would probably be first contact. And this is where some analysis, some observations, some experimentation already came in. Up to this point, I've been focusing on woodland terrain with woods and rough terrain and cultivated terrain. And this is the first significant interaction that I've been looking at basically in building terrain. So these are various kinds of buildings, and it definitely was a whole nother way of looking at it. What I mean is, basically what I've come to is a all different sorts of observations, i.e., first of all, a unit can, these are the different considerations, right? A unit can move through a building without being seen at all, right? So it cannot be just because the red 4 moves 1 hex inside the building that it's automatically observed by blue 4. That doesn't make sense. Clearly, a team could move all the way through a 3 hex building, and if it wanted to, not be observed at all. No chance of observation. So that's a first thing that I didn't have in the woodland setting that I was dealing with before. Next, what do up posture and down posture mean on buildings? Is it the same? In down posture in a building, are you still observing outside the building? If you are observing outside the building, how is your observation different if you're in down posture in a building versus up posture in a building? So what I kind of was thinking is okay, down posture in a building means that the soldiers they're back from the windows. I don't mean significantly back. I'm saying that they're not flagging themselves in the window. Barrels are not sticking out of the window. They're back from the windows, keeping a very, very low profile, which is great for their security, but their observation can't possibly be that good, right? So that needs to be addressed. If they are in an up posture in a building, so I should say down posture in a building, clearly they can see somewhat outside. To what range, and I don't know, not sure. And they can clearly fire from inside the building. And by the way, if they're in down posture in a building and they fire, how do I handle their observation from an opposing unit? The reason why I asked that question is that I already realized there's no way I can have any simplicity. So I cannot have the simplicity of a unit moves in a building, it's automatically observed. That's not going to work. And then the next thing I realize is that just because a unit fires does not mean that they're going to be instantly observed. I mean, that is clearly that's not what happens. There are many accounts of units in combat having difficulty identifying where fire is coming from, right? And that can be in any terrain, and that situation becomes much more prevalent in an urban setting. So just because blue 4 fires out of this building does not mean red 4 instantly identifies it and is instantly able to mass its fire here. So how do I handle that? Is it still unobserved fire? And when does the unobserved fire become observed fire in this setting? Then you have up posture. I think up posture in a building means that the soldiers may be exposing themselves in the windows in order to see farther, so therefore engage farther at farther ranges, but again able to be observed much easier than in down posture in the building. But exactly what that means, that's kind of exactly where I left off. Basically, buildings are making me... So the building terrain threw me back onto the incredibly core concept, topic, and rules mechanics of observation. I mean, observation is just incredibly key. Observation is central to making the combat mechanics well, realistic. Okay, so I am back to thinking about observation, and on the topic of observation, I kind of was thinking earlier today, I was thinking about 3 approaches to observation. 3 approaches to observation. First approach is not an option at all for me, but this first option should be familiar to many wargamers, because the first option is to simply simplify. Simplify and say that, for example, a unit in a building is kind of a it is always kind of seen is always seen at a, I mean, basically simplify means there is only one kind of standardized posture in a building, and that handles all observation fires, everything. There aren't these different particulars to complicate the situation. For example, like in some games, when red 4 got here, certainly blue 4 is here, you know, a line of sight can be drawn between them, and so now they can see each other, and they can fire at each other, and you just proceed like that. Even though realistically there's still 50 meters between these. Each unit is 75 meters away from the other. Each in a large building, you know, realistically, the simplified rules aren't even close. So that's the first approach, which really isn't an approach at all for me. The next approach, so to deal with all of these different, basically the challenge that I'm facing when it comes to observation is all of these different situations and variables and influences, right? The posture and the state of the observer, the posture and the state of the target, the terrain that the target is in, the terrain of the intervening space between the observer and the target, and how that terrain is handled relative to the observer's state and status, posture and state. I mean, that's where it's all getting so complicated. So the second approach is that you deal with all of these complications with a die roll, basically. You deal with it with a die roll, because basically this approach says, hey, all you have to do is, you know, have some base, you know, whatever, 50% chance observation. You have a list of modifiers like what the terrain the target's in, the range, and all this stuff. You just have these as die roll modifiers. You figure out, okay, there's a 15% chance that blue 4 observes red 4 here. 15% chance, you roll, and you proceed. The problem is, first of all, conceptually, there isn't anything vastly wrong with that, but it seems like that would be a lot of die rolling, and I'm enjoying the fact that so far the design is keeping the die rolls to a minimum. So not sure I want to go that route. Another option, so the third option, I guess, is the option that I'm proceeding on right now, and that is that, well, to deal with all these different situations, it's basically a pretty detailed calculation. And what I have now, and I'm trying to see how I'm seeing how condensed this process can be made. But where I'm at now is, okay, can blue 4 see red 4 at this point? Where I'm at now is what's the chance, I guess, what's the chance? No. Yeah. No. How to word it? Well, I guess what I have now is the first step is, given the observer's posture and state, how easily can the observer see through and into different kinds of terrain? So to use the example here, given blue 4 units posture and state, how easily can this unit see through clear terrain? Yes, through and into, or into and through and into clear terrain, through and into a building or building terrain. Then, after that, the second step is basically how observable, how far away can red 4 unit be observed on flat terrain. So given no extra terrain considerations, how far away can this red 4 unit, given its posture and state, how far away can this unit be seen in flat terrain? Then, given that, the third step is blue 4 pays for the terrain from whatever allowance he got from, see if this unit is visible 100 meters away, then that gives kind of the observational allowance for any unit to see it. So with 100 meters away in observation points, blue 4 pays out of that allowance. He pays for the real terrain, the actual terrain, because the 100 meters away is in flat terrain. So now blue 4 pays for the actual terrain and sees, does he have the allowance, the observation point allowance, to see the unit. That is a 3-step process that is, well, it's where I'm at now. It'd be great if I could get that down to maybe a 2-step process, but, well, I haven't gotten there yet. So that's where I'm at on that. In this example, okay, so that's enough about observation in particular right now. What are the implications of all this so far here? The implications in the play here so far is that see, it's fairly easy to move in parts of the urban terrain. See, red 4 was able to get into the village and get into the buildings fairly easily. That being obviously because blocking terrain, right? And the next observation so far is that, see, not in game terms, but in realism terms, this is kind of where why I paused here, because red 4 moved all the way up here, blue 4 was deployed here. Realistically, these forces are still not observing each other. They're still not observing each other. Unless we say that in the up posture, they are basically making themselves observed. But if that were the case, I'll say, if we say that, then really blue 4 should have, yeah, you know, I'm saying that, I'm thinking that right now. If we say that up posture in the buildings, you are exposing yourself in order to see farther and possibly engage farther, then I would say that Blue 4 should have deployed in down posture. If we say that in down posture in buildings you're still, I mean, you're not, it's not full cover, you're not completely you know, hiding in the build, not hiding, you know, you're not completely masking yourself in the building. Okay, so if this is the case, then if this were the case, then red 4 would have simply moved in down posture, which is okay. But I would say that probably would have added maybe even 2 more action cycles, 2 more minutes of simulated time. Now when they come to this point and they're all in down posture in buildings, they probably, okay, so this is where they're not seeing each other. Before, when they were all in up posture, they probably would have seen each other. I missed that up to this point. Okay. So the point is that in this urban terrain, it's easy to move in some of the terrain. Obviously, it's easy to move. Oh, in simple terms, it's easy to move in the buildings. And of course, it's virtually impossible to move outside the buildings and not be observed in this situation, which is the way urban terrain is. So kind of, again, the observation is that urban terrain is already, which is accurate, it's pretty complex. It's complicated terrain. It's complex terrain, which again is the way it should be. And basically, the challenge makes it not necessarily a lot of fun, but as the situation shows, there are times when it's important. Like Blue 4 needs to guard the battalion's withdrawal and has to do it on urban terrain. Doesn't have a choice. So you do the best you can. So my point is, at this point, smoke might be something that would have to be used. But anyways, I think the very next step. Oh, here's another thing about the urban terrain. If red 4 has to move through this village, if red 4 has to move through this urban terrain, and blue 4 needs to prevent red's movement through the terrain, eventually red 4 is going to have to expose itself. The question is how. Are the players given enough detailed options to do that? That is realistic and challenging. But yeah, the urban terrain gave me a lot of stuff to think about because, well, a lot of things to think about that I didn't really have to deal with in the wooded terrain. And this is absolutely critical because, again, in my when I was in Iraq, all of our action was in and around Samarra, a very large city in Iraq. When I was in company commander in Afghanistan, we were in a place that would be considered a place that would not be considered heavily built up. Wardak province I'm talking about would not be considered heavily built up at all, and yet there were always, it seemed like there were always structures around, calots, walled farms, just buildings that seemed to be in the middle of nowhere. let alone the little villages, and a lot of action, a lot of stuff happens in and around those villages, and so even, and to repeat, even when not in the villages, there seem to be, buildings around at all times. Whenever I guess operations, when operations were being conducted, buildings are always present, basically. And then looking at the combat histories I pulled for research, for source material, for OIF and OEF, it is very, very, very instructive that engagement after engagement after engagement is in urban setting, or at least buildings around. The firefight above Gauardesh that I've talked about, that one is unusual in having no buildings around. That one is unusual. So I want the simulation game here to be the usual, and so can't get around dealing with the rules complexities of urban terrain. Leave that here, and until next time.